Hey everyone, welcome to Gay Spaces. The houses of thought that we're going to visit and learn about today are subjected to the people viewing those spaces. But looking at these from a gay lens, we'll explore how capitalism affects gay spaces, performativity affects gay spaces, and how horizontal hostilities affect gay spaces.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to go looking at all the houses of thought.
So first, before we start our tour, let's talk about what gay spaces are.
Okay, I'm super excited.
As I mentioned previously, a gay space is subjective to the viewer. Overall, however, gay spaces are those where someone who is gay would feel welcome being themselves. To an extent, however. Often gay spaces are for more than people who are gay. They're open to queer people in general. That being said, horizontal hostilities do exist in those spaces. This challenges the idea of safe spaces, which gay spaces are often viewed as for gay people. An idea that you should keep in mind as we walk through the houses of thought is how much a person viewing the space determines if that space is a safe space or a brave space, and what that means to them.
Wow, a lot goes into the construction of a space.
Indeed, let's go walking. The first house of thought that we're going to walk through is called Capitalism and How It Affects Gay Spaces. In the article titled Capitalism and the Gay Identity, a lesbian is critiquing gay performances by gay men, specifically who are not gay identifying, and receives backlash from the gay community who felt that the safety of their space was encroached upon by this social theorist. The space here is gay theory itself, and we can see that there is gatekeeping on who can critique someone's performance in a gay space.
Wow, this is an interesting house of thought.
Right? This leads us to our next house of thought and its effect on gay spaces. Judith Butler's performativity. Let's think about what it means to perform in a gay space. Does this make someone who is gay perform the identity that they assign themselves more or less? What is the effect of this on straightness? Butler, the person leasing this house, would say that society determines how we perform our identities. We could say, as theorists, that how an individual interacts with the space, whether that be positively or negatively, determines their behavior in that space. Perhaps, for example, like queer spaces in LGBT groups at school, gay bars, or queer study classes, allow for gay people to be more open and proud of their gayness. Following that same thought, if a person is not gay, then a gay person may be less open in their performativity.
Wow, so each of these houses, while they have some generalizations that we may be able to make, are also dependent on who is looking at them?
That's right! Isn't it amazing?
Sure is.
Let's move on to the last house that we're looking at in this episode.
Sounds great.
Awesome. This last house is called Horizontal Hostilities. While we saw a little bit of this in the first house, this location focuses on just what it means and how it's affected by procreation. The owner of this house is eager to show people what it's all about. The house argues that the separation of sexuality from procreation is a result of capitalism. This could create an unknown hierarchy, atypical of that we've seen throughout history. While gay men have always been here, they are also a product of history. The argument of who is worth more through history, whose work has been valued and not valued, whose ideas have been worthy and not worthy, etc., plays into how capitalism has helped to create this dissonance in the community, leaving room for horizontal hostilities to flourish. And go.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to process that one a bit. Are you saying that in this house of thought, capitalism has helped to further entrench people in a power structure that allows for horizontal hostilities within the gay community?
You got it!
Wow, this certainly has left me quite a bit to think about. I'll have to talk with my partner to see which one we're going to be able to invest in. Thanks for showing all these awesome options. Here's an initial deposit.
Now for a message from our sponsor.
Have you or your family been affected by patriarchy? If so, you may be eligible for some compensation. Call 1-800-QUEER-THEORY and you may be able to get some help. Thank you.
Hi, I'm representing the Lesbian Cake for the 2019 competition.
What are you most excited or nervous for?
Well, I'm afraid of not including the right ingredients in making a heterosexual or normative cake, but I'm excited to use my usual ingredients such as structuralism, performativity, queer theory, discourse, and horizontal hostilities.
Explain to us your tactics here and what you want to place in your cake and what you're against.
Well, I want to be inclusive of the different kind of ingredients. I'm including people of color, culture, butch, lesbians, and marginalized groups. What I don't want is privilege, normativity, social constructs, gender roles, horizontal hostilities, and anything that can hinder the production of a spongy queer cake.
Why don't you want to include horizontal hostilities?
Well, if we look at the history of feminist movement, we can easily see how lesbian spaces have been altered by different waves. When identity politics are used in order to fight for rights, this leaves certain marginalized groups out, which causes indifference within the movement. Lesbian spaces suffered from horizontal hostilities as they became a place of exclusivity and a tactic for radical feminists in the early waves. Black lesbians actually were and continue to be the most marginalized groups in our society.
Oh my, you definitely don't want to include that in your cake. Now for the lesbian cake, tell us what makes your cake.
Before I explain the ingredients, I'd like to inform the judges about lesbian spaces. It is vital to note, along with your review, that lesbian spaces are those which are inclusive of lesbians and their freedom to be. By this I mean an environment where those who identify as lesbian can thrive or feel comfortable as they are. We don't have many in society in general, which is why discourses on structuralism and its effects on lesbian environments is vital to progress. A customer of mine named Judith Butler actually coined performativity, which is the theory that we are always performing and acting out based on predetermined roles. I bring this up because in certain cases, a lesbian cake can be constructed differently based on each person's interpretations of social constructs.
Thank you to all the participants. Now, our winner with the lesbian cake will tell you her secret to success.
It was an honor to participate and show everyone the lesbian cake. What made this cake thrive was inclusivity of all groups within the lesbian community. Someone named Cheryl Clark once said, "There is no one kind of lesbian." And today I presented you a one-of-a-kind lesbian cake. I hope all the viewers are open to trying different flavors and backgrounds further on. Thank you.
Have you been struggling with any of these issues? If so, I have the perfect product just for you.
And if that doesn't come out, Evening everyone, welcome to the Queer Talk, where we walk the walk and talk the talk. Today I currently have a guest today that is going to talk with me about today's topic, which is the difference between queer versus straight spaces. As you all know, I am a trans man myself, and here on this show, people of all intersectionalities are more than welcome. Our guest is known as a notorious queer theory professor and activist, and she is here to aid us in the differences in what it means to be queer and straight. How are you today? We are very gay to have you here. Tell the audience what exactly it is you do.
So, as you said before, I am a queer theory professor and activist. On my free time, I travel to LGBTQ centers and help out the queer youth.
Can you explain to our viewers the difference between queer theory and queer theory?
Of course. The difference between queer theory and queer theory is simple yet complex. Queer theory is about the rebranding of queer studies, both inside and outside of the academic sphere. It is inclusive of real-life experiences and includes the work of queer theory. Meanwhile, queer theory focuses mainly on discourse.
Correct me if I'm wrong. The cishetness in society is strong and pushes strategic, essentialist ideas and social constructs like gender roles. Social constructs are the creation of ideas that are based off the cultural, environmental, traditional, etc. that influence discourse and the practices of everyday life.
You're right on track. Wow.
Some of my new viewers may not be aware, but I am a transgender man. They tend to confuse my gender because I physically look like a cis female. I also heard of rumors of me being a cross-dresser, but that is not what I am. and it doesn't fit the criteria of a cross-dresser. I am authentically a male who was forced to define myself as a girl during childhood.
I think when people think about trans women and trans men, they automatically assume they have physically reinvented themselves through gender reassignment surgeries. However, not every trans person has the resources and urge to physically change their gender. What matters the most is they know who they are and how they enforce the performative of their gender for society.
How do you feel about trans representation nowadays?
Honestly, there's not a lot of representation. However, it's increasing nowadays. I'm in love with the show that came out recently called Pose, which is produced by Steve Canals, Brad Falchuk, and Ryan Murphy. It brings awareness to not only the trans community, but also Black queers, AIDS, and the stigma around the gay communities in the 80s. If that isn't true queerness, I don't know what is.
Well, that's it for now, folks. Stay queer till next time. Have you taken a class with Dr. Pegoda? Because I have.
Hello and welcome to Straight Spaces versus the People. Today we're going to explore straight spaces in the form of a case. First off on my dissertation, I'll be defining what a straight space is. A straight space is basically any space or place that isn't labeled as LGBTQ+. In these places, there's often lack of inclusion, representation, acceptance of people outside the heteronormative roles. Some examples include bars, churches, clubs. This is because churches are usually inclusive and mainly made up of only cisgendered/heterosexual people who also believe marriage is strictly between a straight man and a woman. Being straight is when a person is sexually attracted to the opposite sex. For example, a girl dating a boy. Examples of people who are not included in straight spaces would include people with gay, lesbian, queer, trans, etc. identities.
How is a bar a straight space?
Good question. A bar is a straight space because of the heteronormativity that lies within the interactions that take place in a bar. Usually there's only male/female interactions, and any same-sex interactions would be outcasted. The fact that non-straight people have to have their own bars or clubs emphasizes this point. The same goes for straight clubs, since usually everyone performs in their gender and wouldn't be inclusive or accepting of someone who is queer and rejects the clothing binary that is prevalent in our society.
Can straight spaces change?
Yes, and to further complicate spaces, they can sometimes shift from being a straight space to queer and back, or a straight space can sometimes be straight and sometimes queer. An example of a space like this would be a University of Houston building or a conference hall such as the classroom you guys are in right now. Some days it is a straight space and other days it is a queer space, like when we have queer theory class.
Case adjourned. You win.
2, 3, go.
Have you taken a class with Dr.
Go.
Have you taken a class with Dr.
Pegoda.
Wow. So, wow.